Particular conclave is the result of a discussion that was held some time back, and the idea was that we should bring together the understanding of packaging, which is in one silo, and say supply chain is treated as another silo, and the people who are working in packaging do not understand supply chain, and maybe vice versa too. So, and then there are different silos in organizations. There's marketing, there's purchase. Everybody works in their independent silos. And to what extent can we bring together an understanding of the complexity of modern supply chain? This was the suggestion which we got, and we have tried to bring together 2 days conclave. First day to talk about supply chain, the complexity, what is the emerging supply chain, particularly in the context of modern retail, and for pharmaceutical, where even the complexity is even more sensitive to the effects of, it's a life-saving product, and digital commerce, which is an emerging scenario. The supply chain applies in all these aspects, and we tried to start with our first session, which is to get a perspective on the emerging challenges in the supply chain. And then we would, next day we would move on to how the packaging ends up in supporting this kind of supply chain activity, and how the whole process can be streamlined. That is why we are talking about enabling improved supply chain efficiency with integrated packaging solutions. A lot can be said and written about this subject, supply chain and packaging. There are people who will speak after me, and there's a lot of expertise here which we can. I've just tried to give a little perspective to what we are going to talk about. I've reduced it down to just 2-3 slides, which I hope you will appreciate as setting the tone. From right product at right place to market-focused, resilient supply chain. Today, supply chain cannot afford to be static. It has to be market-focused. The consumer is at the end of the supply chain, and the consumer is becoming a lot more aware of what his rights are and what needs to be delivered as quality. So the idea of this conclave is to share experience on issues related to supply chain management and how it needs to integrate with statutory, counterfeit protection, and end-of-line production needs of the brand. The next few slides probably, explain it best. Supply chain, by its very nature, although we try to make it predictable, but it's not predictable. It's incredibly chaotic. There are many complexities. So the challenge is how the supply chain, with all its complexities, can be made more predictable. So let's make decisions that improve customer service while minimizing supply chain costs. How do we talk about supply chain? How to improve supply chain? If somebody is offering you an improvement, but you say you're too busy looking at it, somebody here is offering the wheel as a way of expediting the supply chain, but no thanks, we are too busy. Here it says, I want you to find a bold and innovative to do everything exactly the same way it's been done for the last 25 years. So what is a supply chain? This expresses very well. Give me a real-life example of value addition at each step of the supply chain. Yes, it is a spreading rumor. Supply chain has led to so many new abbreviations, JIT, DQSA, so many things. Sometimes I begin to think, is this English or are we speaking Chinese? And mostly, of course, now in this modern world, times of apps, there is an app for everything. So I'm sure to manage our supply chain effectively, there would be an app that will be downloadable and everything will be hunky-dory. The biggest problem in managing a supply chain is also about the different domains and the silos in which management organizations work. There is a logistics domain, there's a manufacturing domain, there's a purchase domain, there's packaging domain. So, of course, how to make these silos work together is another issue. So this, I thought, sets a kind of background. I'm sure you, everyone ahead will have a lot more to say about this, but this is what I thought would present a background and perhaps be a little on the lighter side just when we start in the afternoon. We have, to begin this program, we had actually got Dr. Ratnaja Gogula. She was a professor of marketing and strategy at IBS, but unfortunately she was taken ill yesterday and had to be hospitalized, so she would not be able to join us. I would now like to invite Mr. Sridhar Chari, who is our keynote speaker for the afternoon. If you could join us on the dais, Mr. Chari. Mr. Chari is a management consultant from Sapiens Consulting and Research, Hyderabad. He's a graduate from IIM Ahmedabad and BITS Pilani. Mr. Sridhar has more than 30 years of management experience, out of which over 15 years was at CEO level. Currently, he is active in coaching and mentoring, especially in the SME sector. He's teaching business strategy at Premier Management Institutes. We will invite Mr. Chari to make his keynote address.
At the outset, let me tell you that my exposure to SCM has been on a periphery during my professional career. When that word became a buzzword in 90s, or mid-90s perhaps, I was heading a finance company and did not think that it would be of any relevance in that domain. Even if it had, and if I had some improvement in my supply chain, what I would have done is to, again, waste more money in loans, giving it to dubious borrowers with no intention to return. And I would have sunk my company quicker than what happened. So I'm grateful I didn't really pursue SCM. The other buzzword that was prevalent at that time was CRM, Customer Relationship Management. And fortunately, for people like us running a finance company, customers were never a problem. In fact, they would have liked to have courses called LRM, how to manage lenders, so that we could get money out of them at whatever cost. Price was never an issue. I could get as much as I demanded. All that the customer wanted was that I release the purse, issue the check, and hope that there is no after-sales service in terms of interest payments. We had a terrible time. The NBC business went through absolute ups and downs, and it was good that one of the deputy governors of the Reserve Bank in 90s closed the entire business by just one directive. And then now it's come back in a new avatar. So I didn't really have a need to dabble with SCM. But post my tenure in a finance company, I had an opportunity to work with a large liquor firm as director of finance. And that is where I saw firsthand the power of SCM. I remember the company issued a check for 9 crores to the large management consultancy, one of the big fours. And the assurance that that consultancy firm gave us was that they would at least get us a benefit of 25 to 30 crores in the value chain, supply chain. And they achieved it. It was done by young graduates from management institutes who spent 2 years. And within those 2 years, the savings that liquor firm saw in their supply chain costs was in excess of 50 crores. So I'm aware of what SCM can deliver. I've practically seen that. Preparing for this talk, I tried to Google and see what's the latest definition for SCM as it exists now. And sure enough, Google threw up about 12.6 million results, which talks of the buzz that exists in this field. It talks of the buzz that exists. And it also talks about, as Deepak mentioned, the sort of nebulous nature of what SCM implies to various people. From the 1990s, when it was essentially a chain that links the raw material and procurement through a chain in the plant to the chain to the consumer, much has now been transformed. So in the early 90s, we looked at supply as a chain, as linking. We are now looking at what is essentially networking, clearly, to 2005. It's recognized that supply chain encompasses or requires the management, the capability to network within the organization and without the organization with various partners. Now everybody is called a partner. So P1, P2, these are the partners. And so the chain really is a misnomer, is an anachronism. It's not really a chain any longer, it's networking. And that's the change in mindset that is required. And I would even venture to add that in these 10 to 15 years, CRM has also got, in a way, subsumed. And SCM, supply chain management, as Deepak mentioned, extends right up to the end point of the customer. So CRM is very much a part of the SCM process. So the definition that I liked was this one: the management of a network of relationships within an organization, between organization, towards what end? To facilitate the forward and reverse flow of materials, services, and finances. So I just, day before yesterday, we returned a telephone that we had bought from Snapdeal. We were not quite happy, and today the amount is credited into our bank account. Yesterday somebody came and picked it up. So there is a flow and reverse flow that is addressed through this SCM management. And the objective, of course, being customer satisfaction and profitability. I think it's gone from the shift during the 90s, where it was a cost-driven sort of a cost-focused sort of an activity, to something that now will deliver profits and has words like customer relationship embedded into it. So that's the change that's happening in this field. I like this, another comment which I saw on the net, that companies no longer compete as entities but as supply chains. I really don't believe that offhand, but it does a lot to our ego if we think that no longer are companies competing, but supply chains are competing. And for us in the supply chain industry, that's good news. And perhaps if you look at this chain that Apple is presently involved in its business, it's sourcing from all over the world, US, China, Asia. And its sourcing is not just the hardware, but not just the hardware components, but the software as well. And then it manufactures it, all of it goes to one country in China. Thereafter, it goes all the way back into America. I suppose there will be some more warehouses. This example may be US-centric, but there may be 2 or 3 warehouses centralized in various zones of the world. And then the distribution, online distribution, and the brick and mortar retail stores, direct sales force, wholesalers, and very importantly, tying up through a return policy, no questions asked, typical American approach. So when you look at this, we wonder where exactly is Apple located? I mean, when you talk of an Apple as a US product, is it really so? Or is it really a network of partners who determine the future of this? Is it really, as this blurb says, a supply chain that delivers this? Because if you were to look at Micromax, let us say, and if, as in India it is happening, brand is not really the focus. We are interested in value for money. And if feature to feature, Micromax delivers what Apple does, and we have seen the result. It's got over 10% of the market share in a short period of a year. So then what Apple is really competing with is not with the Micromax, but it's competing with the overall costs of a network of suppliers. So that's the relevance that's being put forth today. I remember way back in the 70s, there used to be a textile name called S. Kumar's. I'm talking of 1970s. He was one of the first first business houses that did not have a manufacturing facility. They really outsourced the fabric and they just branded it as S. Kumar's, and they did very well. They had saved the expense of managing a manufacturing output. And they went on to build a brand. Today, S. Kumar's exists, but you and I don't even see the name because it is hidden in names like Reed and Taylor and a number of other branded products. So what S. Kumar is really doing is managing a supply chain from various branded products. You go to his website, which I did in preparation for this, and then I found that he's got a host of 10 brands which he's managing. And who are his competitors? There's another supply chain by the name of Arvind. You go to the Arvind website and you find they have a number of foreign brands, where Arrow is one of them, which they are offering in the marketplace. So perhaps there is some element of truth or some indication into the future when they say that companies no longer compete as entities. They don't compete as S. Kumars and Arvinds, but they compete as supply chains. Likewise, Apple would have to look at Micromax and Carbon and others as effective competitors in their supply chain. So now the link has moved over. Now in this context, I now go on to share with you what I think are some of the trends. A lot of things have taken place. There is a paradigm shift in the way manufacturing and business is done in the last 10 years, thanks to IT, thanks to, in our own country, thanks to the liberalization post-1990. So a lot of things are happening. I just pick up a few of them which are relevant for the SCM perspective, and then see that how is it of use to me and who's me. I'd like to, for the context of this discussion, limit me to a player in the packaging domain, since there is this link to packaging here. So what is in it to me as somebody who is active in the package business? What are these trends of relevance and why? And I also make an assumption, and if I'm wrong, I seek your pardon. I also make an assumption that most of the players in the packaging domain are in the SME space, or at least in a space that's highly competitive, which is a characteristic of SMEs. And therefore, in this SME domain, how does the changes that are taking place in the corporate world impact? Now, what is the shift that I'm talking about? Back in 2000, not too far away, 10 years ago, these were some of the words that were very actively used. Customer service, where customer delight was the end objective. Then there were incremental changes. You need to keep on bringing out newer products incrementally. Casio was a good example. Zara is still now, every 15 days, the Zara fashion changes. So it's in the same business of dresses, but then there is a fashion that comes up every 15 days. There was an emphasis on functional focus, be an expert in design, research and development, or purchase, depending on what is critical to your company. There was a focus on absolute value. forecasting was important, and of course training, because we were getting into a globalized world and we needed to have people who were adequately trained to face that. Now in 2014, I think the buzzwords are CRM or SCM, as I feel. From incremental changes, we are really talking of absolute transformation. From functional focus, we are talking of teams. From absolute value, we are talking of relative value. And the new buzzword is endcasting, not forecasting. And from training, the buzzword is talent management. Now, these buzzwords can be taken in two ways. You can either take it as a buzzword and think that it's linked to the past, or you may really want to reflect and say, yeah, look, do I need to do something different? And appreciate that now talent management is more important than just training people. Do I need to get away from forecasting to endcasting, etc.? What is that relative value? So taking up just these 4 or 5, 6 of these areas, and there are many changes that have taken place. What I'd like to do is to share with you what I think big corporates are doing, and then see what is in it for me as a supplier in the packaging domain. As far as the CRM is concerned, I think all of us recognize on-time delivery and in-stock availability are given. Now, nobody really talks of this as being USPs or differentiators. Anybody who still thinks that is really way out of sync with modern businesses. It's taken as given that when you step into a place, you will get your refrigerator or you will get your iPad or whatever you want. It's available, and except for certain brand creating reasons, a car may take 5 to 6 weeks. But even that is essentially for a strategic reason, not because there is a supply capability or an inefficiency. So on-time delivery and in-stock availability are given. Now people are getting to focus on critical customers. You know, they are wanting to get away from mass marketing, there was a buzzword, to let's see who are our critical customers and let's focus on them. They're having different supply chains for different customers. Micromax, Moto, others are now introducing special brands on Flipkart or on Snapdeal, only available there, a different supply chain, and those models are not available in the brick and mortar shops. So different supply chains for different customers. They don't think that this is the way the business has to be run, this product has to go through this distribution channel. There has to be a recognition that you need to cater to different supply chains. And then the emphasis is not just the price, it is to see what is the costs to serve, because now you're networked. So if I need to get my product out there, I need to network with this logistics person, with this warehousing man, with this, etc. And then do I look at that cost to serve and then to retain the customer going ahead, than just a simple price? And then, of course, the force of digital media. I added this after my breakfast meeting with Deepak yesterday. I realized it's a huge impact that we need to do. Examine and acknowledge. So what is in it for me? As an organization, does my organization truly appreciate the difference between CRM and customer service? Or are they just feeling a little uncomfortable with these buzzwords and thinking they are just the same? They're not. And that's being proven by various case histories of very successful companies. Can I shift from being an order taker to a demand taker? I want to give you an example, a live example that happened to one of the companies that I am mentoring. It's in the MR firm. 2 months ago, a taxi aggregator wanted to enter Hyderabad, and he called up this MR firm and said, would you do a survey for me in Hyderabad? So this MR firm took the order, did a good job. A month ago, the same firm aggregator called up and said, I'm now entering Ahmedabad. Would you do a survey for me? That was good. But the real happiness that we all got was when last week, the same company called up and said, what do you think? I want to enter into Warangal and Guntur. And what do you think? How do you think should we go about it? Already now, this MR firm, which was essentially taking orders, are now taking demands, accepting queries. And that's a process which is not easy to develop. It requires, like this firm did, to take a knock on the Hyderabad survey, to just about break even on the Ahmedabad survey, and hopefully make a little money for the new 10 cities that they have got. So there was a conscious attempt to move away from being an order taker to being a demand taker. You know, I demand, I want you to do this. I think you are the best guys to do it. That consciousness has come about. That requires handling negative aspects of supplier-customer relationships. Everybody doubts. Mine is an MR scheme. There may not be any such issues. But otherwise, a customer would not like to share a lot of issues or relating to his product with a supplier. How do you handle it? It has to be handled. It can't be ducked. It's possible. And then, like this MR firm, am I willing to share risks and rewards? Offer it free first time, break even second time, and do that, you know? And how do I build the mutual trust? So this CRM dimension is what I would, and coming to this future of force of the digital media, I'm carrying that magazine with me. This is the latest issue of The Economist. And gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, these words I'm reading for the first time. Perhaps some of you who would more active in the digital space would have some association with it. But for me, is it over? Pragmatic buying, extreme personalization, impressions, intelligence broker, third-party data, saleable segments, web beacons, e-tags, piggybacking. I just don't understand any of these words. It's a supplement in The Economist that talks about the changing force of digital media and its impact on advertising and promotion of products. This is definitely going to impact us as suppliers, as partners to the main firm. And we need to get up to date and in command of the digital media. And therefore, I'm grateful to Deepak for having pointed this out to me yesterday in the breakfast. So I just looked at it. The second one is on this incremental versus transformational change. What is meant here is that we need to get away from this, you know, we are there, this is what we do. The best I can do is a 25% change into something else, a little deviation this way. That was possible back in the 2000s, but now in a digital age where you can access suppliers across the globe and with apps and digital media, one needs to perhaps do a complete change, a transformational approach. And this is where I picked this up from an interesting article. He talks of, are you an agile corporation? And corporations are becoming agile. Your customers are becoming agile. And what does he mean by agile? He says that they are becoming alert to detect changes. They are detecting changes. They are becoming accessible to, they make their data available. Data is available. They are highly decisive. They recognize that historical experience does not help. Now that's easily said, then experienced internal, that what we have done up to now for 34 years, what I have done for 30 years, 15 years perhaps as a CEO is of no use now. Unless I know what those 10 words in The Economist mean, I am not going to be active even in my semi-retired existence. So historical experience does not help. Swiftness, the first mover advantage. Even though Micromax may copy feature for feature Apple, and it may be available at 1/4 the price, Apple will still continue to have major market share because of the single fact that they were first. And there is something about a first mover advantage that the market see. And therefore, any idea that comes in, if you want to be different than your competitor, supplier, is there something that you can do first before anybody else gets in? Again, going by the market research example, we didn't give the opportunity to this aggregator to call up IMRB and seek the rates from them. We just said we'll do it because we wanted to be the first mover. And now from just 2 cities, we are getting perhaps 50 cities as our sale. So the swiftness, how swift you are and how flexible you are to modify. These, ladies and gentlemen, are not grandmother's words, but these are actually messages that come across to us to say that we need to do things in a very different manner. Business analytics is going to play a big role. Fortunately for us in our country, we have enough of talent. Fortunately, we have a number of companies to whom we can outsource on a per transaction basis. If you hand over your entire sales invoice, he will come back with fantastic analysis for a song. And There are, for instance, companies in Delhi who charge 300 rupees to give you a newsletter every month to 3,000 addresses. And they charge only 300 or 400 rupees. Can you believe? Because they have the expertise of preparing a good format. They just want you to give the content. They'll put it together. And I was surprised, and I asked him, really, are you sure is it 300? He said, yeah, because they go by volumes. And they use the same template for other companies as well. So analytic costs are coming down day by day. And this is something which we will have to use very much in our. And if you think transformation is not all that buzzword, here is IBM, which in 1990 had a profit of $6 billion, 3 years down the line, minus $6 billion. And it took all of 15 years for Mr. Gertner and Palasimino and others to transform IBM from a hardware manufacturer to a solution provider. And 2008, their profit was 16 billion. So they came back from minus 6 to plus 16 because there was a focus on transformation. So your customers are really transforming themselves every day, even as we speak. And we have to recognize that for us, what is in it for us, as an organization, what sort of transformation have we done in the last 3 years? Can we consciously ask ourselves, have we sat down and said, now I'm going to do something different than what I've done to my customers? How much of new technology has been introduced? Technology need not only be machines. It could be processes as well. But is there a conscious attempt to go out of the ordinary role of business and to do this? And besides MS Office and Excel, how much of IT is used for analysis, analytics? This will be relevant for suppliers who want to be in touch with their customers who are already transforming themselves in this big manner. So that's the message here. From functional silos to team, we understand that volatility is the norm. We are going to be living with it on a day-to-day basis. And the shift from sales, companies are shifting their focus, your buyers are shifting focus from sales and distribution to sales, distribution, finance, after sales. It's a whole new way of looking at their businesses, and they're looking at functional integration. The typical case study example in my academic world I talk about is Whirlpool, and how Whirlpool in 2000 gave a huge contract to, which we can say proudly, an Indian company, i2, and trace their, and completely transform their supply chain. This requires functional integration, as that Harvard Business article will tell you. It requires cross-functional participation, IT. Therefore, what is in it for you? Is there a strong cross-functional, or are we still, is your production man still not aware of what drives your customers? Does he just produce for the marketing man, or is he as knowledgeable as your marketing man? And I think if you put our hand to our heart, we'll find that very often the silos are still existing in our corporations, but not so with your customers. They are looking at functional teams, like the definition I said. So how closely are logistics and production integrated, or are they still continuing as under silos? What is this absolute value to relative value? This is all about metrics. And just for that example, I'd like to take you through this, where if your marketing silo is delivering 95%, your production silo is 95%, quality 95, accounts 95, the 4 critical functions, actually the company is working at an 81% efficiency. And that is what Whirlpool realized. And Whirlpool said that we want to switch from 81 to 95. This is Whirlpool USA. And that's why they went through a whole exercise in supply chain management. So what we need to do is that we need to review our metrics rather than keeping it silo-based, functional-based. We got to look at it on a networking basis. We got to have metrics, what we measure, that takes into account cross-functionality, accountability. And whatever metrics we do, we got to identify the drivers. What drives those metrics? We say that we have goals, but that should be really honestly worked through, and we have appropriate goals. And of course, it must be easy to implement. You'd be surprised what an independent survey, and I'm not trying to probably seek any sort of advertisement for the MR firm that I am entering. But you'll be surprised what an independent agency survey can happen. Right here in Hyderabad, we did a dealer survey for a large packaging unit. There were about 59 customers. They gave us a carte blanche to go and meet all the customers, and they benefited immensely from the feedback, because when an independent agency goes and talks to customers, a very different picture emerges, to the extent that we were able to point out names of people who are creating a problem in the chain. So I'm grateful for that company for this opportunity, but this is an independent assessment would tell us whether we are actually monitoring the right metrics. So are these metrics in place? Are these metrics really identifying and focusing the drivers that is there? And how do we implement it? Deepak was mentioning just now about how people tend to turn away anyone coming in from the supply chain domain. That's a big resistance. That article, Harvard Business Review article on Whirlpool, takes 2-3 paragraphs about the resistance from within the organization itself, and how a thick-skinned SCM manager was able to get over that resistance. Because to drive this, to get cross-functional support, you require a thick skin, and to do it. And to see that there is no manipulation of data. This, I would not take much time, but just to tell you that even in items like, this is again reproduced from an Ernst & Young article, where even a simple metric like market share, different companies have different drivers. For instance, this driver here is competitor pricing. You need to monitor competitor pricing. For this company, brand preference was one, advertising was one. Now I was just thinking, if suppose you were supplying to a toy manufacturer, one of your metrics, I'm sure, would be what is the growth in that packaging for that toy. But another more realistic and more useful metric would be how many new package demand came from that same customer. You've got to look at a metric in a very different perspective and not go by the traditional manner of looking at metrics. So this was an example of that. I'm just skipping that one. Finally, from forecasting to endcasting, and the emphasis here is, as Deepak very clearly showed, that supply chain ends at the customer end. It goes right up to the customer end. So how do we then forecast, rather than your immediate marketing, your immediate customer, how do you forecast what's happening right down to the end, at the end user? Because you are actually an intermediary to an intermediary to an intermediary to a final consumer. So this requires a rigor in forecasting and taking information from various sources. Too often, we just limit ourselves to our existing customers and live with their statements and their view of the market. But I think we need to go beyond and get down right to the end user. And the forecasting period can be longer than a year. It certainly can be longer than a year. And you've got to look at trends that are happening in your customer's market. Your customer's market. So, as a supplier, have you started endcasting? Have you looked at endcasting? Are you sure that firms have the requisite skills for such skills, or they can be outsourced as well? Or is the linkage with existing customers, is the linkage with existing customers adequate and trustworthy for you to get data? That's important. Otherwise, most of your forecasting may turn absolutely awry. That's it. Talent management. Essentially, today we are not looking for a production expert or a logistics expert. We're looking for somebody with a global orientation. We're looking for somebody who's a team player, who has who's comfortable talking and sharing information, not somebody who feels that information is power, so I'm not going to share it with anybody. And many of it's a typical Indian trait, and I'm as Indian as all of you, to think that knowledge is power, information is power, so why share it? That's not going to work. So a team player has to be open with information. Analytics is extremely important, not just total sales, but total sales in which month, through which channel, at what rate, etc. Perhaps there are various other points of control and measurement that we got to look at, and that requires analytical skills. and every single employee of yours must have leadership skills to be able to command respect from your customers. So are the present skills in tune with the changing dynamics? Because in your customers, that's what they're looking at. And instead of a simple training program, do we have a skill enhancement program in place? To summarize, have we as a company, has the DNA of customer relationship, not customer service, has the DNA of a periodic review of internal systems and external system, independent of the fact that you're doing well, but still a review so that you're ready to rapidly transform, and you have the capacity to rapidly transform, or the DNA of periodically reviewing the metrics and not just limiting it to one metric, but looking at something more that drives the true business that truly drives the business, looking at reviewing metrics and going beyond the immediate customer to the, is this the DNA of all this? Is this already imbibed in the system? If not, the presentation here is to suggest that it's high time that we look at our organizations in this manner. Thank you.
The concept of combining packaging and supply chain management is a wonderful idea, and the program integration between the packaging and SCM, the topic selected was excellent. It was not done just like that. It was done with a brainstorming session, and which they have yielded the best results in these 2 days.
Today it has been really important for the industry to understand the importance of the whole integration of automation with the enterprise level. Apart from the topic, I really liked the whole concept of assembling the industry experts. It was a good learning experience for me. Definitely would like to come back on the next conclave too.
In fact, like before I came here, so it was so I was under the impression that like it is completely packaging related or supply chain related for a specific domain or an industry. But it was really a surprise. Like it is good to know that like diversified industries were there and the speakers were eminent speakers were there. So it was like a complete day. I could see that nobody left. So it was very interesting. Each session was well managed. So I think like hats off to the organizers.
And what is my takeaway from here? I think it's an education, and it's only when different elements of the supply chain actually interact and share knowledge. It's when we'll have a completely integrated product for our customers over there.